Hey guys, this is Dave, and I have the Xduoo Xd05 Basic2. This is one in a long line of Xd05 products. Of course, of the devices in the Xd05 lineup, this is actually kind of their entry, I guess, to mid-level device. And I've spent a lot of time with this device over the last several weeks, pairing it with different headphones, comparing it with similarly priced devices. And for the $299 price, I do think it brings some pretty useful features and even some improvements over the original Basic, but it isn't perfect. And I think I'm ready to share my thoughts with you. So as usual, we'll go over what's included in the box. We'll go over the design, the specifications, then we'll talk about sound. We have a lot to talk about, so let's get started. So this is everything that comes in the box with the Xd05 Basic2. You have a longer USB-A to C cable. You also have a shorter USB-C to C cable, a headphone adapter, some extra screws, and then some extra stick-on rubber feet. And again, they've priced this at $299. And I just quickly want to point something out because you may have already noticed that this only has a 6.35 headphone output. And I guess I could be jumping a little ahead here, but I feel like I need to quickly share a little information just to give you some context about this device before we go any further. Maybe for those of you who are newer to the hobby, but I think one of the first iterations of this device came out around 2017 or 2018, if I'm remembering correctly. And there have been a lot of different variants of the Xd05 over the years, like the Xd05 Pro and the Xd05T. Of course, those are the higher end or the more expensive devices in the Xd05 lineup. They're also much larger and just have more features, but this particular smaller version has been preceded by the original Basic, and then before that, the Plus. Before that, they just called it the Xd05. And again, I think it goes all the way back to 2017 or 18. And those older versions had these Bluetooth modules that you could just attach. But now, since then, they've just incorporated Bluetooth into the device itself. So again, you have multiple variants ranging in price from about $150 up to $800. And one thing that remained consistent, again, just with these smaller variants, including this device, is that they did not include a 4.4 balanced output or a 3.5, just a 6.35 single-ended headphone output. The more expensive versions do, but not these. But then they did introduce later on the Xd05 BAL and the BAL2, which of course had balanced outputs. But all that to say this, with this device, they've just stuck with the 6.35 single-ended output. Now, as far as differences between the Basic2 and the original Basic, I know this does, of course, it does add Bluetooth 5.4. This also ups the power output from 500 milliwatts to 750 milliwatts. And then this also ups the signal-to-noise ratio from 115 up to 124 dBs. And there might be some other minor differences, but the biggest difference is the price. The original Basic was only $155, which for the feature set wasn't that bad. But now with the Basic 2, we are almost doubling the price. But again, they have brought some new features and even upped the performance just a little bit. Although the original does have a bigger battery. It has a 4,000 milliamp battery versus the 3,000 milliamp battery with this device. So there's that. Anyway, so as far as the outside of the device, we'll go ahead and start with the front. We have our 6.35 headphone output. We've got a display and then a multi-function knob. On the left, we've got these 4 buttons, a power, gain mode, bass boost, and a Bluetooth pairing button. Then on the back are 2 DC power input options, a power switch that gives you the option of running off of either the internal battery power or the DC inputs. You then have a USB Type-C input, a 3.5 auxiliary output, and then going back to the display, of course, it displays all of your basic information like battery life, volume level, input mode, and gain mode. Now, as far as the DAC configuration, the Basic2 does also use a different DAC chip than the original. This uses the CS43131 versus the ESS ES9018 K2M that was used in the original Basic. It can also decode up to 32-bit PCM and DSD256. And again, you also have the ability to swap out the op amps by removing the screws on the front panel here in case you like to tinker. Now, as far as the design and build, it does look and feel very nice. They've kept the same kind of utilitarian gray and red design language used with many of their other devices. The build quality is quite good. It's a little large, I guess you could say, compared with something like the BTR17, which has actually many of the same features. But then again, there are plenty of large transportable devices out there like the Clarinet Pro by Ray, the Muse Hi-Fi M6 Double here, which that just showed up a few days ago. And it's also about the same size as the FiiO M21, which is actually a fully functioning DAP for about the same price. And I don't want to get into the whole portable versus transportable discussion. Suffice it to say, while I wouldn't necessarily want to carry something like this around in my pockets or in my hands, I guess it is certainly small enough to fit in a bag or a backpack just fine. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to sound. Okay, so as far as drivability and power output, even though you don't have a balanced output, you are still going to get a pretty impressive 750 milliwatts of power output with this 6.35 output. So you shouldn't have any issues at all driving pretty much any headphone that you can throw at this, even in low gain. Now, as far as some of the full-size sets that I tried this with or tested this with, I have the HD800S, I have the Empyrean 2 LCD3 2022 version, that's this one here, Poet, Aria Stealth, 109 Pro, the new FT7, and then I also have some mid-tier sets like the Para 2, the 105 AER, 105 Silva, Baroque, 99 Classic, and as far as IEMs, I have the Divas, Monarch MK3, the Dawn X, Cantor, FA19, 2020 Andromedas. Of course, I used those to test background noise and a bunch of other stuff. And it seemed like it paired pretty much, as far as power output capabilities, this was able to drive all of those quite well. But it's also delicate enough for sensitive IEMs as well. Bottom line though, as far as drivability, power output, unless you've got something that's really rare or just exceptionally hard to drive, this is going to be able to power, again, most of your full-size sets out there. But how's it sound? Well, to me, it does lean a little warm, but it's still within the range of linear, I guess you could say it. And it was a little more apparent when I would switch over, if I would switch over from something like, again, the K19 here. Of course, this uses an ESS stack chip set and certainly leans more clinical. But even when I was comparing this with my DNA Alpha Pro, which again, that also uses an ESS chip, to me, the Alpha Pro does come across as a little more linear compared with this. And of course, those are more expensive, but those are a couple of, they're just my neutral references. And I also have the Ibasso DX340. That's my reference DAP. And then the Questyle M18i is one of my reference dongles. And to me, the Basic 2 was just, again, a little smoother in its treble presentation, and it had a small amount of added low mid-range energy compared with those. And I wouldn't necessarily say that it was so smooth in its treble presentation that it lacked a lot of detail. There was still a moderate amount of detail, not a lot, but it's fine for this price point. Point being though, the treble presentation was just a little smoother. So on one hand, while it may not have had the most detailed presentation, at the same time, it didn't ever sound sharp or edgy. And on tracks with sibilance, it did seem to do a good job keeping that in check. Bottom line though, is that while this does have some coloration, it is still what I would consider to be, again, well within that range of linear. And again, you do have some coloration, you do have some energy in the low mids, and that does contribute to it having a little warmth as far as the way it presents male vocals and even some instruments. And I think one of the Xd05 Basic 2's more notable attributes is its naturalness. And I talk about jazz at the pawn shop all the time. I use that for testing several things, one being instrument naturalness. And to me, I felt like the Xd05 Basic 2 did a fine job of rendering the piano, the saxophone quite naturally. The saxophone sounded very rich, as I would expect it to in this recording. It also had good texture. And again, maybe not the best I've heard, but it was textured enough to deliver what I felt was a fairly accurate rendering of the saxophone. And then going back to the treble, as far as how it rendered cymbals, they sounded nice and natural. Again, not the most detailed, but in terms of instrument timbre, I didn't notice anything that sounded off or incorrect. And there's a ton of texture and detail in the cymbals on that recording. And I did feel like this did a pretty decent job, again, of rendering those details. Again, it's not its strength. I would say its strength is in its naturalness. I also felt like I was getting adequate levels of air and shimmer when present in the recording, although micro details were just okay. So basically, from one end of the frequency spectrum to the other, I felt like I was getting a pretty good sense of the overall picture. I didn't really feel like anything was missing. Now, as far as technical performance, we've already determined that the detail levels are pretty good, but not great. I do, however, feel like the sound stage is, as far as the width, is maybe above average, again, in terms of width and depth. It actually reminded me a little bit of the K13 R2R in terms of its forward layering. Maybe not quite as focused in its imaging, but it does still have similar immersive qualities. So that did bode well for the Xd05 Basic 2 in terms of it offering me a fairly immersive listening experience. Okay, now as far as comparisons, I have some other portable devices here, roughly in this price range. Some are a little more expensive, and you can see that when it comes to portable devices, they can definitely vary quite a bit in terms of shape and size and features. Of course, the FIO M21 back there is going to outdo all of these in terms of features, as it is actually a fully functioning DAP. So there's no source device required, and it can also provide up to 950 milliwatts of power output. So that thing is just a beast, and it is just very value packed for the $329 asking price. Overall sound performance is probably about the same as the Basic 2, but I would still be more likely to reach for the M21 because, again, it's just such a good value and it sounds great. I also have the Dathonray Clarinet Pro, and yes, it is more expensive, so it may not be a totally fair comparison, but I did compare them just out of curiosity, and while it does not not have Bluetooth, it's still a device that I've been using quite a bit when traveling, and it is without question the better performer of the two. It's more transparent, more detailed, and it just offers a more refined listening experience overall with my higher end IEMs and headphones. And then I also have the new M6 Double here. And let's turn this thing on. I don't know exactly where this is gonna land in terms of pricing. I do know that the M5 Ultra is around $300, but this brings some new stuff to the table. So it could come in a little bit higher. And I don't want to give away too much, but of course, as you may have already guessed, it does, like the original M5 Ultra, it does have both a vacuum tube mode and a transistor mode, but it also has this what is referred to as a Nixie tube display. And check this out. This is really cool. And you can see how there's almost a depth because of the way this particular Nixie tube is designed. There are layers to the different numbers. So you can see some numbers seem like they're a little further away than some are closer. So that is super cool. And there's a lot of stuff that this does. I'll have a full review hopefully coming up shortly, but this does bring a lot more in terms of really interesting and unique features to the table than the original M5. So this could come in priced a little bit higher. I don't know for sure. Now there is one thing that the Basic 2 does do better, but I'm gonna save that for the full review. And I'll do a comparison between these two in that review. What I will tell you, however, is that with IEMs specifically, the M6 Double is giving me a more linear, more transparent, and just a more detailed presentation in transistor mode. And it's certainly a more interesting and more fun device than the Basic 2. So do I recommend it? Well, if you are looking for the most transparent or the most linear or detailed sound, then I do think there are better options out there. And I can recommend the VTR17, the M5 Ultra, the M21 DAP. So this may not be the best option, but I don't think it's a bad option. I do think it's very powerful. It can handle, again, just about any headphone that you throw at it. Its sound performance is also reasonably good. And while I wouldn't call it feature packed necessarily, it does have some good features, and I also think the build quality is very good. So while again it may not be the best option, but I do think it's still a reasonably good option. Well, I think that does it for this video. If you are new to the Xduoo channel and you like our videos, please take a minute and hit that subscribe button. And if you want to go a step further, you can also support us through our Patreon. I'll be sure and leave a link in the description. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch this review. Please like this video, please share this video, please comment on this video. I hope you have an awesome day.